Poker is essentially a contest of asymmetric information, and that asymmetry isn't just in the cards on the table. It's often written on the face of the person sitting across from you. While we've all seen the cinematic version, the dramatic eye twitch or the telltale Oreo cookie from Rounders, real-world poker tells are much quieter and far more rooted in evolutionary biology than most players realize.
The Oreo trope is exactly what leads most people astray. They're looking for these massive neon sign indicators. In reality, the most reliable tells come from things that are nearly impossible to suppress because they're controlled by the autonomic nervous system. We're talking about adrenaline spikes, pupil dilation, and microexpressions that flash across the face in a fraction of a second. If you look at the work of experts like Zachary Elwood or the research of psychologist Paul Ekman, it's clear that the human body starts leaking information the moment the stakes get high, regardless of how stone-faced a player tries to be.
It's fascinating that the body almost betrays the brain's attempt at deception. You mentioned adrenaline. How does that actually manifest at the table? Because if someone's hands are shaking, that could be a massive bluff, or it could be the sheer excitement of finally hitting a royal flush.
That's a classic example. Shaking hands are one of the most misunderstood tells. Generally, if a player's hands start trembling after they make a big bet, it's an indicator of extreme strength. This is an adrenaline dump. The brain recognizes a massive opportunity, the fight in fight or flight, and the body reacts. It's much rarer to see that level of physical shaking on a total bluff because the bluffer is usually trying to remain as still and invisible as possible. They're in freeze mode to avoid detection. But there's a caveat. If a player's hands are shaking the second they sit down or before they've even seen their cards, that's just baseline nerves. They might be playing above their usual stakes, or they're just new to live games. You have to establish that baseline before you can interpret the tremor.
So the freeze mode you mentioned for bluffers, that seems counterintuitive to the strong means weak mantra people always talk about. If a bluffer is trying to be invisible, wouldn't they also be trying to look strong?
The strong means weak rule usually applies to conscious performative behavior. If someone is making a big show of how confident they are, staring you down, splashing chips aggressively into the pot, or chatting away about how they just have to gamble, that's often a sign of weakness. They're trying to project a story. But the subconscious stuff works differently. A bluffer is often physically rigid. They stop breathing naturally. Their posture becomes very stiff. On the flip side, someone with a monster hand is often more relaxed. They'll slouch back or look away from the board. There's a specific tell called looking away from good cards. Research into player behavior shows that when someone hits exactly what they need on the flop, they'll often instinctively glance away immediately. It's like they're trying not to draw attention to the source of their good fortune. If they keep staring at the flop, they're often still trying to figure out if it helped them, which usually points to a mediocre hand or a draw.
That's a great distinction between the performative stuff and the stuff they can't help. What about the eyes? People always wear sunglasses at the table to hide them, but is it really just about the direction they're looking, or is there something deeper, like pupil response?
It's both. Pupil dilation is a huge one, and it's virtually impossible to control. A study from the Tokyo Institute of Technology actually tracked pupil size in poker players and found a significant correlation between pupil dilation and reward expectation. Essentially, when you see something you like, a pair of aces or a favorable river card, your pupils dilate because of a surge in norepinephrine. It's the brain's way of saying this is important. That's why pros wear those dark glasses. It's not just to look cool, it's to hide a biological reaction to hitting a hand. But beyond dilation, eye contact itself is a tell. Amateur bluffers often avoid eye contact because of the social pressure of the lie. However, more experienced players might overcorrect and stare you down to try and intimidate you into folding. Again, it comes back to that performing versus being distinction.
Let's pivot to timing, because that's something that applies even more frequently than physical twitches, especially as the game moves online. If someone snap calls or takes forever to raise, what does that really tell us?
Timing tells are arguably the most consistent indicators in modern poker. The snap call is one of the most reliable. If you bet and your opponent calls instantly, it almost always rules out a very strong hand. Why? Because if they had a monster, they'd at least take a second to consider a raise for more value. An instant call usually means they've already decided their hand is good enough to call, but too weak to raise. They're often on a draw or holding a medium strength pair. Now, the opposite, the long pause followed by a bet, is often a sign of strength. They're tanking to make it look like they have a tough decision, hoping you'll interpret their eventual bet as a desperate bluff. They want to sell the narrative that they're uncertain when they're actually sitting on the nuts.
But isn't there a risk of over-analyzing that? I mean, online, someone could just have a bad internet connection, or they're multi-tabling and their attention is elsewhere. How do you separate a genuine timing tell from just life happening?
That's where volume and baselines become critical. If you're playing online, you need to look for deviations. If a player usually takes 3 seconds for every action, but suddenly takes 15 seconds before a big river raise, that's a data point. You also have to consider the board texture. If the board is extremely wet, meaning there are lots of straight and flush possibilities, and they snap call, it's very unlikely they have a set or 2 pair because they'd be worried about those draws and would likely think about raising to protect their hand. If they snap call on a dangerous board, they're almost certainly the ones on the draw. Online, you're essentially looking for patterns in their decision-making speed relative to the complexity of the situation.
It sounds like you're building a psychological profile of the player in real time. What about verbal tells? In live games, some people won't shut up, and others look like they've forgotten how to speak the moment they're in a hand.
Verbal tells are a goldmine because most people aren't natural liars. One of the biggest patterns Zachary Elwood identified is what he calls defensive statements. If a player says something like, "I'll just call," or sighs and says, "I guess I have to see it," they're almost always weak. They're trying to sound reluctant to discourage you from betting further. On the other hand, if a normally chatty player suddenly goes silent when a big bet is made, that's often a sign of extreme focus and a strong hand. They've stopped the social performance because the pot is now serious. There's also the let's gamble tell. If someone says that while shoving their chips in, they're usually trying to make their hand seem like a coin flip or a lucky draw when they actually have the best of it. It's a way of lowering your guard.
It seems like the common thread here is that we're looking for friction. If the behavior feels forced or unnatural for that specific person, it's likely a tell. But how do you prevent yourself from becoming the one being read? How do you develop that poker face everyone talks about?
The best way to be unreadable is to be consistent. This is where mindfulness comes into play. You have to develop a routine for every single hand. You take the same amount of time to act, you place your chips the same way, and you keep your physical posture identical whether you have 7-2 offsuit or pocket aces. Many pros use a mental count. They'll wait 5 seconds before every action, regardless of the decision. That completely eliminates timing tells. Also, focus on your breathing. Deep, rhythmic breathing through the nose helps regulate that adrenaline spike we talked about. If you can keep your heart rate stable, you're less likely to have those involuntary tremors or pupil changes that give you away. It's about becoming a black box where the output is always the same, regardless of the input.
That's a tall order, especially in a high-stakes environment where the stress is real. Is there a danger in relying too much on tells? Can you get so caught up in looking for a glimmer in the eye that you forget the actual math of the game?
Absolutely. That's the biggest mistake intermediate players make. They'll make a hero call with a weak hand because they thought they saw a lip twitch, ignoring the fact that the opponent's betting line made absolutely no sense for a bluff. Tells should be the tiebreaker, not the foundation. You play a solid, mathematically sound strategy first, understanding ranges, pot odds, and equity. Then, if you're in a spot where the math is 50-50, you look at the person. If they're exhibiting a reliable tell of weakness, you tip the scale. But if you start chasing tells at the expense of strategy, you're just gambling on your own intuition, and in the long run, the math will eat you alive.
It's essentially a layered approach. The cards are the base, the betting patterns are the structure, and the physical tells are the finishing touches. It's interesting how even in a game that's become so digitized and data-driven, the human element still finds a way to leak through the cracks. It suggests that no matter how much we study the game, we're still fundamentally biological creatures reacting to stress and reward.
Exactly. Even the best AI bots can't replicate the specific friction of a human player feeling the weight of $1 million decision. Whether it's the way someone's neck vein pulses, something many players wear scarves to hide, or the subtle shift in how they handle their chips, those leaks are the ghost in the machine. Mastering tells isn't about being a mind reader, it's about being an expert observer of human behavior under pressure.
It turns out that the most important thing you can bring to the table isn't just a good hand, but a deep understanding of the person sitting across from it. By paying attention to the quiet signals, the timing of a call, the stillness of a hand, or the sudden silence of a talkative opponent, you're able to see the game for what it truly is, a psychological battle disguised as a card game. If you found these insights into the hidden language of poker helpful, share this episode with someone who's looking to sharpen their edge at the table.